In other countries, the government has a larger role in the decisions made by businesses and the consumers. So they don't have free choice like we do. The government is setting the rules for the market in these planned economies. So, more government control or full government control. So, you have socialism and communism, and the socialism's based on the principle that the government should own and operate key enterprises that directly affect public welfare. So in these countries, government's going to run basically telecommunications, healthcare, and other entities, and they're going to have higher taxes to pay for these programs, and the businesses are not going to have control in what they produce. The government will. And the purpose of this type of system is to ensure that resources are being allocated so that everyone benefits from it. In other words, your notes say, to share the wealth. So profit motivation is not as high because of the high taxes. Just think, if you're not going to be motivated to make a lot of money if you have to turn around and give it to the government. Germany, England, and then other European countries are examples of these kind of economies. And then you have communism. And China and the former Soviet Union are examples of communist countries. And this is an economic and political system that calls for public ownership of virtually all enterprises under the direction of a strong central government. Basically, here, business and consumers are told what they can and can't do. In a communist setting, all are supposed to be equal, but most of these systems fail because it's just too much government control. It also mentions that countries that adopted communism, for example, the Soviet Union, North Korea, and Vietnam, did not thrive. So these types of economies don't thrive for many reasons. We talked about a capitalist country, socialist, communist economy. In reality, most economies are a mixture. The U.S. economy is becoming more of a mixed economy instead of just being a free market economy. Of course, the United States is still a capitalist nation, but we have more government regulation. And then government-owned businesses have turned to privatization. And privatization is the process of converting government-owned business to private ownership. Most economies now, though, are mixed economies. We can tell if an economy is working by a few indicators that we're going to discuss, and the first one is gross domestic product. This is the total value of all goods and services within a nation's borders. This measures value and productivity. The higher the GDP, the higher the level of economic performance. Next is the employment level, and this is the key element of economic health. The unemployment rate, which you probably have noticed or see this a lot being discussed, and the reason is because it is a key element of economic health. It's the percentage of people in the labor force over 16 who don't have jobs and are actively seeking employment. The unemployment rate, think about it, when people have jobs, what do? Well, they have money to spend and invest, and that's going to help the economy when those people are employed. Of course, we would want the unemployment rate to be low, but it's not ever going to be zero because some people are unemployed by choice. Maybe we don't like our job or boss, so we decide to change jobs. And another example is I stayed at home and homeschooled my children for a while, so I chose to be at home. You also have frictional unemployment, and this is when it's possible to find better jobs, and structural unemployment, and this is unemployment for a longer term, maybe because the skill that person had is no longer needed. Now we need to talk about the business cycle, and this is something that you will talk about a lot in economics. The business cycle is the periodic contraction and expansion that occur over time in virtually every economy. So let's talk about contraction. When you think of contraction, think about the period of economic downturn. So growth is declining. Businesses aren't producing as many goods, and unemployment's high, and the GDP is not rising. Contraction is kind of in those situations. Then you have, under contraction, you have what's called recession and depression, which you're probably familiar with both of these. And this is the economic downturn marked by a decrease in the GDP, the gross domestic product, which we just discussed, for 2 consecutive quarters. And then depression is an especially deep and long-lasting recession. So recession's 2 consecutive quarters where the GDP is going down, and then depression is a long-lasting recession. A recovery is a period of rising growth and employment. And an expansion is a period of robust economic growth and high employment. So a recovery is after a contraction, and it's when the economies were kind of recovering. So these words really, you can understand what they mean. And then you have an expansion, and this is when the economy's doing really good. It's the exact opposite of a depression. In the late 90s, we saw this. And this is when, in the late 90s, the economy grew, and it grew at an increasing rate, and the incomes levels increased, people made more money, and unemployment was low. Back in the good old days, as I call it. Here's a great visual of the business cycle. So you can see here, we're doing good, and then this is the contraction. And then this is the peak is when the economy did good and then started going down. This is as good as it gets, and then it starts contracting, and then it reaches its lowest here, and then it starts recovering, and then an expansion, because it's a real good long recovery, and we're doing good. So this kind of shows you what we were just talking about here. We can also evaluate the economy through price levels. We can look at price levels and really determine how well the economy is doing. Because think about it, if the prices are stable, if they are rising, they're rising slowly, then you know the economy's doing pretty well. But if prices suddenly fall or they suddenly rise, this is a warning sign or a red flag. Inflation, this is a period of rising average prices across the economy. We are experiencing this now. Hyperinflation, average monthly inflation rate of more than 50%. Disinflation is when there's a slow price increase, and deflation is a period of falling average prices. I want to mention here that low levels of inflation are okay, but what you have to worry is when you see rapid change. So remember that rapid change is a sign. The government is going to use or uses price indexes to evaluate inflation. We have consumer price index and producer price index. Consumer price index is a measure of inflation that evaluates the change in the weighted average price of goods and services that the average consumer buys each month. The producer price index is a measure of inflation that evaluates the change over time in the prices that the business pay each other for goods and services. So you have your consumer and then you have your producer. Increases in both of these are monitored by the government and by the businesses. Another way we can evaluate the economy is through productivity, and this is the basic relationship between the production of goods, which is the output, the goods and services, and the resources needed to produce them, the input. So the output divided by the input gives you productivity. And if this is high, then the GDP, the gross domestic product, grows. And the new technologies has helped the U.S. achieve good productivity. Remember, the higher productivity doesn't necessarily indicate that it's good quality. So don't associate quality with the higher productivity. But it does show that if productivity is high, then the GDP grows. So that concludes this chapter on economics. I know it was just a quick overview, but let me know if you have any questions.